And welcome back to the channel, everybody. Welcome back to a new video. So today I'm going to do what could very likely be the most boring video in the world, because we're going to talk about math when it comes to Stellantis, and in particular how this could affect Dodge, because I had some comments on my last video where people were saying, how could Dodge go out of business when Stellantis made $6 billion last year? And I appreciate the question. I appreciate the challenge. And when I said in my last video that Dodge could cease to exist and join the dinosaurs in their extinction, some people thought I was saying that Stellantis is going to run out of money. Let me be clear. It's possible. Anything's possible. We've seen it happen before. But I'm going to share with you how that math works and why I believe that Stellantis could yank the plug on Dodge completely if it doesn't turn around fast. And I think there's a lot of reasons, like I shared in my last video, that it just might and most likely won't turn around fast because of the continuous stupid decisions that leadership continues to make. All right, so let's jump right in and check out the stock price, which a lot of folks have asked in the comment section. You know, is it a buy? Is it a sell? Is it this, that? I am never going to give advice on stocks. I am not educated enough to do that. I have my own beliefs. I think I've done really well in some areas, and I've had some great mentors and people who have given me some good advice. But in the end, I would never want to give advice and then be wrong and cost any of you any money. So there is zero stock advice coming from me today, and anything I say that might resemble that, just know it's coming from the most uneducated, unqualified person you could ever take it from. So don't run with what I say and try to think you're going to go get rich. I don't want that blood on my hands. But let's talk about the stock nonetheless, so we can do a little short history lesson that I'm going to talk in this video about 2023 and 2024. 2023 being the last final year of our Hemi cars, and a year where we had to say goodbye to what I believe was what kept Stellantis looking really, really good for a very long time. Now, mind you, Stellantis has many other brands, and those other brands could have diluted the success of the American brands with Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, and Ram. But they've done so much damage with Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, and Ram at this point, not to mention Fiat. They've screwed that up completely too with overpriced electric cars and whatever the hell they're doing in other countries, which I don't pay attention to. They've ended up in a situation where they are over here at this point. But let's talk about where Tavares was starting to make all kinds of money. He's selling his dream here. We're going electric, and then started to ride this little wave up in 2023. Now, we all experienced 2023 when they were selling cars with massive markups and ripping us all off. Dealers were still making really good money, ripping us, trying to rip us all off, well, ripping a lot of people off, and they were still doing good. And Tavares was selling his EV strategy tied to the EV pseudo mandates that existed in the United States that would make him look like this brilliant genius to make this giant leap from huge Hemi V8s over to electric vehicles and stupid things like the Hornet. Well, he was able to collect his gigantic $40 million paycheck walking into 2024 as this was happening, and everybody thought it's going to go well. It's going to go great. Wall Street was patting him on the back and saying, keep doing it, keep doing it. While we were all, at this time, all of us here on YouTube, we were screaming, iceberg ahead, iceberg ahead. This isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. What's great is there is videos all over YouTube from people just like myself, TK, Butter, and so many others screaming back in this period that this is a mirage. This is not real. This is not sustainable. Nobody's going to want the BS that you guys are going to be selling us. But nonetheless, Tim Kuniskis got bounced out in 2024. All these horrible things happened, and Tavares was cutting expenses like crazy, laying people off, moving jobs outside of the country, and Wall Street was celebrating him for that this whole first part of 2024. And then things just started getting worse. Inventory started to climb. People were not buying the junk that he was selling. The Hornet sat, the Fiat failed, and so many other cars that they build were struggling and they weren't getting anywhere. But the entire market continued to struggle because interest rates were too high. Prices got too high, all because I believe Stellantis and Tavares and the leadership there, even the board of directors is responsible for thinking we can just keep raising the prices on these people and they'll keep coming back for our product. And they found out they were wrong. And then, boom, the article started to come out. Stellantis isn't selling anything. Inventory is piling up. Hell, they can't even sell the old 2023 inventory that the dealers are sitting on that are marked up like crazy. The dealers are screaming their heads off. Stellantis starts to sue their own suppliers. You remember all those articles? They start going to war with the UAW. We have an election looming. We have all kinds of uncertainty. And then, boom, 2024 ends in a horrible crash of 70% loss of profit on their balance sheet. And let me just tell you, here's a little punchline spoiler before I jump into the other slides and content. They did not make $6 billion last year. So you got to read a little bit deeper, and there's something called free cash flow we're going to talk about in a second. And I want you all to think while we're talking about this stuff about how you run your own household. If you've got $50,000 in the bank, well, let's just call it $100,000 in the bank, you make $100,000 a year, and you've got $25,000 or $30,000 in credit card debt, or let's just say with your cars and everything else, you're at $100,000 in total debt with credit cards and your cars. You want the debt to be going down, the income to be going up. That's no matter how you cut it. You want the debt to keep going down and the income to keep going up. That's what you want. And then you want your savings account to go up, not down. If you start having to pull from your savings account, that's end of the world times. And imagine this. Imagine having your checking account or your savings account going down while your debt's going up and your income's dropping by 70%, which is why when we jump into how 2024 ended, you're going to see how bloody and ugly this was. And I'll tell you, yes, it might take a decade to kill Stellantis, but I think we're underestimating their ability to do stupid things and that they might be capable of completely decimating this company in somewhere between 3 to 5 years if they keep on the same trajectory they're on and stop listening to whoever's giving them the horrible advice in their little echo chamber and start delivering products that are cheap and profitable and safe and reliable that customers want, and then bring out the fun cars that you can overcharge us for that we will line up and still buy, not too overcharged, but that we'll still buy, and stop delivering this garbage that nobody wants, and then celebrating when you sell a couple of them and that all of a sudden that means that things are turning around. It's not. So here's 2023 results. I'm going to try to talk fast here. Net revenues, forget about that. Let's just go to what's important. Net profit. In 2023, and this is in euros, so I want to be very clear. When I say dollars, I mean euros, but just know it's like $1.09 versus $1 to the euro dollars, or the euro. So it's not that far off, but just know when I say dollars, I'm sorry. It's just that's the language I speak in, and I meant euros. So I'm going to try to be clear. Why didn't I translate this for you all? Because I don't have time, and I figured the numbers are what they are. A positive is a positive, a negative is a negative. So here's the net profit grew 11%, $18.6 billion. Now, most of us would think that net profit means, well, that's how much money's left at the end for me to put in the bank and or reinvest. That's my profit. That's not how any of these companies work, and frankly, it's not how even our own houses work, and you'll see why in a minute. Because I look at, if I'm working for a company, I skip right past net profit and I look at, wait a minute, what's my free cash flow? How did that come out? Because that's how much actual cash got saved and put in the bank for me to use later on, meaning my savings should be going up. It should be getting better. And in this year, 2023, the savings account, we're going to call it, their reserves, their cash position, liquidity position was very strong. I'll show you that in a second. So they made about $12.9 billion, an increase of 19% compared to 2022, with industrial available liquidity. That's the number I'm talking about. This is their savings account. So they ended 2023 with $61.1 billion in the bank. That is a massive number, and it's why their stock was strong and no one was worried about it, and it was definitely a good, smart buy, and it looked like it was going to be going great. But what we all knew is that they were going to hit a wall. I'm not going to talk about the other numbers. I'm just going to get right into this. So $61.1 billion in their savings account, in their liquidity. This is how much debt they had at the end of 2023, $37.25 billion. So this is your debt in your household. Let's just say you made you had $100,000 in the bank, but you had, I don't know, $35,000 in debt or $60,000 in debt. You could still buy yourself out of debt if you had to. You could still just cut and run and zero out your debt and start all over if you needed to and still be pretty strong and have money left over. So they were looking really, really good, which is why they were willing to pay Tavares $40 million. It was a drop in the bucket between the profit and the free cash flow that they were shoveling into the bank. But now let's look at what happened in 2024. Revenues weren't down that much, but net profit was down 70%. So here's the deal. If your revenue was not that far off, I mean, it was off, no question. 17%, not 70%. What happened? Well, they were spending tons of money on all these changes, all these buyouts of all these layoffs and all these lawsuits and all this crap that they're dealing with. Certainly, they had lots of expenses with regard to recalls, and I'm just guessing this stuff because I can't dig in deeper than that. But they had lots and lots of expense, new expense underneath that, along with the massive drop in unit counts and sales counts. So here's the deal. A drop in net profit of 70%. So let's just call net profit your income, your salary every single year. How many of you could take a 70% hit without having to pull from your savings account? Now, you may still, because you're smart with your bills and expenses, you may still be able to yield a little bit of profit in your house, have a little bit of money left over. But what if your car breaks down? What if there's something you need to pay for that wasn't a budgeted expense, was outside and above that where that cash had to be pulled from? Well, here's why. The industrial free cash flow, the free cash flow, FCF, was negative $6 billion. So while it shows they net profited $5.5 billion, they actually were negative $6 billion in free cash flow, meaning they had to pull $6 billion. They had to take what, $5.5 billion of that from their profit and then actually lose a little bit of money and yank it from their savings account in 2024. That is not a good thing. That is a very bad thing. But let's talk about how this math works. So here's the deal. Their liquidity at the end of 2024, so check this out, their liquidity, money in their bank, their savings account, went from $61 billion to $49.5 billion. So let's do the math. What is that? About $11.5 billion that they spent of their savings account to do all these changes and retooling and factories and moves and reductions and whatever, development of that stupid EV thing, launching of a Hornet, rebadging of a Tonale. All this money they've been spending to go this direction, paying out Carlos Tavares massive amounts of money. All this idiocy led to $49.5 billion in the bank versus 61.1. And I promise you, I did not look back at 2022, but they likely went up from 2022 to 2023 and what they had in the bank. And now, with all the decisions they made, they took a giant dive down to $49.5 billion. So here's the interesting math. Their debt, though, went up. So here's the deal. At the end of 2024, as of December, they were sitting on $38.73 billion. And then we go back here, end of 2023, their total debt was less at $37.25. Doesn't seem like a big swing, but let's go ahead and do the math. That is about $1.5 billion with the B. Billion. That is brutal. bottom line is their debt, it went up. Their debt went up. They went down almost $11 million in savings. Their income went down 70%. They went negative in free cash flow. So they actually, instead of like they did over here, putting an extra $12.9 billion, $13 billion, or 13 billion euros in the bank, they actually didn't. They actually lost 6 billion euros. So that is a huge swing. This means that if they continue doing this each and every year, if it gets worse, if the 70% becomes 80%, 90%, if their revenue goes so negative that they can't yield a net profit and they continue to have to do the negative cash flow at the end of the year dance. And let's just think of some things that might cause that to happen. So there's something called capital expenses. Capital expenses, many of you know this. Capital expenses are things you buy that you can spread the cost out of that over a period of time. You can also depreciate it. So for example, a new building or something, a new factory might be a capital expense, but the company still has to spend, let's say, $1 billion to launch the thing, but they get to not hit their P&Ls for that year with that full expense, which is why it shows a net profit versus a net loss or negative free cash flow, because they still use the cash. So it's like you living in your house, and while you had $6,000 left over at the end of the year, your engine blew on your car, and now you had to spend that $6,000 back in there. You were still profitable for the year, but you have to spend that $6,000. And let's say you put that on a credit card and you financed part of that. Well, now you also increased your debt. So this is why I would say, let's say this is their worst year ever, at least that I know of. I haven't dug back in, but let's just say this is their worst year in the last 5 years. If they keep losing, let's say $6 billion, $6 billion, $6 billion, $6 billion, while also increasing debt or not buying down their debt, while also seeing their savings, their cash reduce year over year, how long losing $6 billion in cash per year would it take to exhaust the $49.5 billion? And that's the question. With that said, this company would be strong enough, probably is very, very much strong enough, to be able to continue to do some other ways of raising cash through Wall Street or in accumulating more debt, which that just makes the company weaker and weaker. So I will end with this point, so I don't belabor this too much. Is the point I was making in my last video is, and I've worked for publicly traded companies for a long time, and I understand how they go. And one of their first objectives is to have a company that's not going to go out of business and end up in bankruptcy. And the CEOs are very clear that if a division or a branch or a region or whatever it is does not perform per the budget that was assigned to them, and I'll tell you, if you Google how important is a budget in a publicly traded company, it is the most important thing, because that's how much money they're giving that entity to run. So let's say Dodge's budget was $1 billion, and because nobody's buying their cars, they have to spend a lot of money in incentives and in rebates and price reductions and giving dealers money to help them stay in business, whatever the costs are. Or let's say I have to spend money on launching a new product because the other products are failing. Let's say like the Hemi car. It's going to come down to, where do we get the money? And that's a conversation that's had in companies all the time. Where do we get the money? And somebody's going to say, well, we got $49.5 billion sitting in the bank. Why don't you give us some of that? And the CEO and the CFO is going to go, nope, we already drew down on that too much last year. We're not putting our company at risk anymore, because it's losing $6 billion because there's problems throughout the rest of the company. There's $6 billion divided by $50 billion. You can do the math. That's probably 10, 11 years of losing that money before that company is completely out of cash. But what if that doubles? What if it triples? What if they end up having a couple, just one or two $20 billion free cash flow loss, negative free cash flow years, and that company can become walloped. And now what I believe, and I'll end with this, is that Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, and Ram are all staring down the barrel of having a really bad 2025. And it's possible that 2025 is actually worse than 2024. And they are telling everybody in Wall Street what every company says. Let me show you this. Here, Stellantis anticipates a mid-single-digit margin on its adjusted operating profit, which is broadly in line with the 5.5% margin achieved in 2024. I think it could, and remember, at that margin, let's just say if they figure it's going to be in line with 2024, that would mean unless they radically cut expenses and don't have any more of those capital type expenses or retooling or other expenses, new expenses to burn off some of the profit, the cash profit, that means that they're thinking they might make another $5.5 million if all things were to stay the same. But if they spend $6 billion in that cash and they end up $6 billion negative cash flow, that will be another year. I think that there is a chance that while they're singing it's going to be okay, they're banking on. That's why they got to get that twin turbo i6 out. They've got a problem with Fiat. They got a problem with Maserati. They got a problem with so many other brands, from what I understand. But I know they got a problem with Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, and Ram. That the bottom line is, I don't know how they return to profitable growth and positive cash generation in 2025. And if it continues to, then by the way, this was all written before they knew how the Daytona EV was going to flesh out. That's going to cost them a fortune. So they could actually end this year worse. It could be double as worse. Now, I could be wrong. Remember, I'm not an expert. I could be completely wrong, but they could be twice as bad as they were in 2024 if they don't get something in their long list of brands that is a hot seller that is moving off the lots. Because right now, at least in the U.S., they don't have anything that's flying off the lots. Chrysler's got nothing. Jeep's probably selling stuff because there is a lot of inventory out there and they are able to move those things. Trucks might bring them through okay, but they're not going to get anything from Dodge and Chrysler as it stands. And I don't think the other two brands could pull them out. They might just stay the same as they did, and they'll just lose a bunch of money in Dodge. So would Stellantis say, we're not giving you any more money. We're not putting any more money. We're not pulling any more savings. We're not taking any more debt. Let's sell that thing. Let's close that thing. Let's get rid of that thing. Who the hell knows? I'm just telling you the numbers, folks. I'd love your input. And if I'm out of my mind, if I'm wrong about all this stuff, I didn't go to college. I just read online and I learn as much as I can and try to comprehend the best I can. So feel free to correct me in the comments below. Just be respectful about it. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.